Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narativ Live with our special series, 5 Nights, 5 Secrets about Jeffrey Epstein. We're very lucky to have Kait Justice here tonight. Kait, how are you doing?
Thank you for having me.
You've been having good success recently with your coverage of Jared Kushner. And I'm dying to answer the question that people have often asked me, who is the successor of Jeffrey Epstein? And the name that sometimes comes up is Jared Kushner. Is he the new Jeffrey Epstein? And that doesn't necessarily mean in the human trafficking department. It could be that all the ways, yes. But it's probably just in his relationship with certain world leaders and his financing through certain world leaders. It's a lingering question, and it's a hell of a tease for everyone who's joining us tonight. Before we get into it, Kait, if I could just update everyone on what's going on with the Iran situation, because, earlier on today, things were really escalating as people were suspecting, there would be some sort of peace talks, and those fell apart. Then after those fell apart, there was an expectation that war would resume. Now, that is not the case as we look at things now, because the President, Donald Trump, has told everybody on Truth Social, which is where he does the stuff, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so. And upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we've been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed the military to continue to the blockade. In other respects, I remain ready and able and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted. Now, this is what one would call a lie or a piece of fabrication, because what's really going on is, it's emerged that Iran has been able to rearm itself. Many people suspect it's rearmed some of its air defenses. I can get confirmation on the fact that there are certain chemical supplies that have arrived in Iran, probably from China, in order to resupply some of their missile supply. These are images now of what it looked like when the U.S. intercepted the Iranian vessel the other day that carried some of these supplies. Once they were on board, they were able to determine that many of these supplies that could have been dual used for either commercial use or military use were on board. And that is what Donald Trump was referring to this morning when he was on CNBC. He made a really unusual statement that caught everyone by surprise, saying that he thought that China had given Iran some things. The U.S. troops board this vessel and then ultimately seize it. This is an Iranian vessel. It's gotten the Iranians very upset. Of course, they're upset with the blockade of the Iranian ports, and they are threatening to attack American vessels at any minute. Now, if Donald Trump continues the ceasefire, if he doesn't prompt an attack first, it's likely there won't be a response from Iran. But if, indeed Donald Trump does do something and starts firing or defending his positions against the Iranians, then we could look at a very serious situation, because there are two naval vessels, the USS Frank E. Peterson and the USS Michael Murphy. These are Navy-guided missile destroyers that are inside the straits, and they're busy cleaning up the straits of mines. Now, that puts them in what, military experts call a kill box, because really they are sitting ducks at that point for any attacks that could come from Iran all the way up through to the top of the Gulf there, or the top of the Straits of Hormuz, and all those little islands along the way. That situation is very concerning for people who are watching the military positioning tonight, because, of course, it could be a real bloodbath. It could hurt many Americans on the seas in these vessels if there's an attack by Iran. So let's play you that clip now from Donald Trump from earlier on, CNBC Squawk Box, when he was on talking about what he said were Chinese gifts or something like that given to the Iranians.
We caught a ship yesterday that had some things on it, which wasn't very nice. A gift from China, perhaps, I don't know. But I was a little surprised that to have a very good relationship, and I thought I had an understanding with President Xi, but that's all right. That's the way war goes, right?
He is, in fact, signaling that conversation we know he had with Xi was about rearming the Iranians with missile defense vehicles, or manpads is what they're called. They're sort of these shoulder missile defense weapons that are very, very powerful and effective. So if those haven't been given to the Iranians, that means the Chinese have stuck to their word. But it does seem like they're resupplying with some other things that is making the Americans concerned that if they call off the ceasefire tonight, they'd be leaving 2 U.S.-guided missile destroyers. It's a breaking news situation, and everyone should be watching it. There is many alerts this evening from various countries asking their citizens to leave the Middle East, concerned that the whole thing is a bit of a powder keg right now. and could be inflamed at any minute. And to that, let's move on to 5 secrets with Kait Justice here. Kait, it's an interesting intersection that we're having with breaking news tonight involving the Middle East and the person that you've been covering, which is Jared Kushner, because Jared Kushner is the peace envoy to the Middle East. He's the guy who's negotiating the Middle East. He is extremely conflicted. He is severely conflicted with his investments and various sponsors from the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia.
Downwind of Truth, yeah.
The Downwind of Truth. Explain to us what you've been finding out about Jared Kushner and the Saudis.
I think one of the benefits that I have kind of looking at all of this is that I am not an expert. Like you are very well versed in all of this. And so for me, I'm kind of just coming into this with one question that I always go back to, and it's like, but why? That's usually my question, right? And usually it always has been coming back to Jared Kushner. And what I recently learned, I had written about Scott Bessent and his dealings with Kushner, and they are currently in the process of, Scott Bessent and our government is supposed to be overseeing this purchase of EA Sports by the Saudis, and Jared Kushner's, I believe it's his Affinity group, is in for 5%, I believe, of this deal. And then I think he's getting some other fees kind of as like a consulting thing.
What's called? UA Sports?
EA Sports.
EA Sports.
EA Sports is actually one of like the largest gaming platforms probably in the world. And they have data on over 500 million people. And one thing that made me in particular, very concerned about the sale of this to anybody, let alone a foreign country, is the fact that this data that they have been gathering at EA Sports is a lot of data around gamers and about your personality and your response times to things and how you react under stress, and just all of these data points that you wouldn't think is being collected is definitely being collected. And so there's all of this data, plus I'm sure it's a valuable company. And so the Saudis are hoping to purchase this. So I started looking into a lot of this.
How did you do that, by the way? Why EA Sports? What led you to you're talking about electronic arts, really. This is that company. Okay, it's a really, really big gaming company. But yeah, this is a big gaming company. But what made you start there? What tweaked your interest?
I think that I was looking into Scott Bessent, I think is what I was looking into. And then I started learning about that particular deal that was currently something that was very controversial, because a lot of experts who analyze these kinds of things have said that Kushner's involved in this strictly because who's going to say no to the son-in-law of the president, in this particular cabinet anyway. Right. And so that, I think, is really why he's involved in this. And it's to make sure that this happens. Now, where it starts to get a little bit, to your point, conflicting is that the Saudis had given Kushner $2 billion, I believe, towards his Affinity Partners fund. And again, I'm not fully versed on how all of this works, so this is very like generic layman's version of all of this. But I think it's in August, the Saudis have an opportunity to take that money back. So I think it is like, is this a good investment? Should we continue kind of thing? And they have the option to take this money back. So Kushner definitely had incentive to make sure that the Saudis are happy. So I started, just learning about that relationship a little bit. And I had started to I think I had found an email, and it was Epstein basically laying out a whole plan for the Saudi royal court on how to essentially remove themselves from the Western banking system. He kept telling them the regulations essentially in the Western banking system are holding them back. And he had proposed to them an oil-backed currency. So he was trying to essentially get them to start their own currency backed by their oil. And he even went as far as to pitch a cryptocurrency that was compliant with that new currency. And I don't know that this was the actual creator, but the email said so.
It's so interesting because he has a big history with crypto, of course.
Yes.
Some people suggest he may have been involved in the invention of crypto. I don't believe that. But, as early on, he was involved with various communication with various countries about crypto and about doing exactly what you're describing there. In fact, I think he pitched a very similar idea to the Russians about finding a new banking system that would be modernized, that would be disconnected from the old traditional banking system that basically came out of Europe. So his pitch to a lot of these countries who are sort of, behind sanctions or finding it difficult to get out from behind sanctions was this crypto opportunity to try and find a new modern system. So it's not surprising to hear him pitch them. And it's not surprising to see that he's connected to the crypto world because one of his key advisors is a major inventor of crypto. But were the Saudis receptive to this idea?
But yeah, I've spoken to some of the founders of Bitcoin who are very excited. And I don't know where this ever evolved to, but that's the name I was looking for. It's called Blockstream. There is a person named, I think it was Adam Back, and he is the founder of Blockstream. He's also one of the people, because, there's like this short list of people. What's his name? Satoshi. I can't remember.
There's a baby Elon Musk, some people suspect, but I don't know.
I think this Adam Back is one of the people that's on this short list of people that they think maybe is the actual creator of Bitcoin. And so anyway, Epstein had proposed, all of these things. And in my research, what really struck me about all of this is how similar all of this started to sound with what Jared Kushner was doing with his Affinity Partners. And the Affinity Partners was, like I said, there was the $2 billion investment. But what was really especially, I don't want to say interesting, but suspicious about that is that the Saudi Crown Prince, MBS, was specifically told not to invest that money, that Jared's investment group was not a good, recommended place for their money. And he personally said, I'm doing it anyway.
This came at the end of the first Trump administration when Kushner was sort of doing the rounds, taking his victory rounds, if you will, and taking money along the way. And the Saudis ponied up with $2 billion courtesy of their sovereign fund there. And the sovereign fund board was the ones who said to MBS, no, don't do this. Kushner's not experienced enough to be handling this kind of money. He doesn't have the track record. But nevertheless, it was overridden by MBS, as you rightly say there. And that's how Affinity Partners became funded to the tune of $2 billion. Now, it's not the first time that Jared Kushner has been, sponsored or believed to be under the influence of Jared Kushner. Though years ago, I remember MBS gloated. He said, I've got Jared Kushner in my pocket because he, basically had him in his pocket. So it's not like it was new, but, it's interesting that MBS, who's now the Crown Prince, really pushed through this Affinity Partners $2 billion investment.
Yeah. And then the other interesting thing that, again, made me think Kushner. So one thing that Kushner had really taken credit for was something called the Abraham Accords. And it's really meant to be both a peace agreement, but also one that helps to recognize Israel as its own sovereign recognized nation and to help normalize relations with Israel in the Middle East. And that's kind of what it was positioned as. That I had found an email that Epstein had written to one of the leaders of Qatar. And this was shortly, so Jared Kushner, I should have probably started here. A lot of this all goes back to a property that is notoriously, I think, noted as the worst real estate deal in New York real estate history.
666, right? Is that the number of the building?
So the building is literally 666 Fifth Avenue. And he had gotten in a bad deal in way over his head. And so I learned that one of the ways is so people will purchase debt at a discounted rate. So maybe someone owes $1 million, but you pay $500,000 for this debt with the hope that you're going to get that additional money. So that's your profit. And so essentially, there was all of this stuff that people had done, jumped through hoops. And Jared Kushner still had, money that he needed to come up with for this property. And one of the places he had gone to was Qatar and their sovereign wealth fund. And from what I understand, it was going to happen. And this was during Trump's first presidency. After that happened is when they had gone ahead with the blockade against Qatar.
I want to see if I can pull it up here.
And there is a quote, and it says, "If the people would allow your country to recognize Israel, could be interesting to discuss." And so it made me think, well, wait a minute, because 2 years after that is when the Abraham Accords were announced, and Jared Kushner really championed all of this. And
was Qatar a signatory to the Abraham Accords at that point or not?
I didn't get that far to really go down that road and understand it more, but I do know that it was something that is meant to try to get as many of the countries in the Middle East on board to help normalize those relationships with Israel.
Yeah. It was the big showpiece of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump's, supposed realignment of the balance of power in the Middle East, where,
Yes.
They would now be able to have this unity between Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. Some people said Qatar, although it was unclear whether Qatar was going to be a part of that at the time, because they really had a different way of thinking in Qatar than those other countries. But, even before Trump was elected, there was a deal between the Saudis and the UAE and Israel to try and do this. One of the reasons they wanted to put Donald Trump in power was to try and come up with a deal that would allow this rebalancing of power. And so it's not surprising to see that Jeffrey Epstein, who, many people, I certainly believe, was anxious to try and get Qatar on board. And it is interesting as well that Jared Kushner, who's got very close ties to the Israelis, including Benjamin Netanyahu, sleeping in his childhood bed. Not with him.
No, but anytime he was there, he'd sleep in his childhood.
It's really weird story. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu was the ambassador to the United Nations at the time, and also later as, for him to be staying over the Kushners is one thing, to be staying over in Jared Kushner's bedroom is a little weird. Nevertheless, that's how close they are. That's how close Kushner is to Bibi. We've seen it through the Ehud Barak emails. So it's not surprising to see this email here.
At Jared Kushner's Affinity Partners, the mission statement, and I don't quote me on exactly this, but from what I remember, the mission statement is something to the effect of creating like an investment channel or some kind of investment relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
It's Affinity Partners, and they had $6 billion in assets under management now, okay? Compared to the $4.8 billion in 2024. So they really have been growing a lot in this period of time.
So what I had learned is with the Strait of Hormuz closed and the oil unavailable to us or, whoever else, we have less options. And one of our options is the Saudis. We can purchase from them and they have oil. But from what I understand, it is essentially twice the cost per barrel. The Saudis seem to be directly benefiting in that way and making more money because we have no option but to purchase other people. And then they can continue to fund Jared. So it's like...
Explain that to me. Do you think that the war is actually raising the price of oil, which we've covered a lot on Narativ, and you think that's making the Saudis a lot of money?
Like I said, this is very layman's understanding of it all. I know that this is a very complex market and there's a lot that's involved
I think that's
with it.
What you say is correct.
Yes, but from what I understand that they're, I forgot, it was like 10 or 20% of our oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz or something like that. And so obviously with that unavailable, Saudi Arabia is one of the other places that we can access for energy. And part of that is oil. And from what I understand, the cost of their barrels is like double what we would normally be paying. And so I'm sure that we're normally getting oil there, but not all of it. So we're purchasing a significant amount more. I'm sure we are or will be, or others are and will be. So with this closed, they appear to be earning a lot more money. It's very beneficial for them all the way around.
All the oil countries are really, so happy about this because whether it's Russia or Saudi Arabia or the UAE, they're all making a lot of money. The UAE is even asking for a bailout from the United States.
Yeah.
But the bottom line here is really what you're saying is Jared Kushner is compromised in many, many, many ways.
Yeah.
And not only is he compromised because he is the son-in-law of the president, which is bad enough. And not only did he walk out of the White House having earned millions of dollars just by grifting of being the son-in-law of the White House, he left the first administration swearing he would not go back into politics and then going back into the venture firms and getting all this $2 billion, now $6 billion from the Saudis in order to continue his private sector businesses. But then he decides to come back into the peace process as a peace envoy, and he's tried to negotiate peace now on two levels, both unsuccessfully. And it just is so smelly because he is so corrupted.
Unsuccessfully. I mean, do we know if he's even really trying?
Not be.
I think that's ultimately, at the end of the day, the point is, regardless of whether he is benefiting, is not, the fact that there's a potential for it at all, he shouldn't be the one there. He shouldn't be involved in this in any capacity whatsoever. And I was talking to Waj earlier today, and he had reminded me about the Tulsi Gabbard situation in February and how she had been presented with some kind of complaint that was meant to be investigated. And she took it to Trump and his administration instead, a conversation of somebody that was very close to Trump. And I believe Waj had said that it was related to Iran. And it did come out that that person was Jared Kushner. That
was sort of an open secret that it was Jared.
But it's all roads lead back to this. Clearly this is a deeply corrupt situation that is impacting the whole world. And the fact that we have a Congress that is continuing to let it happen, there's just no forgiveness for that.
Well, you're absolutely right that, Jared is not just compromised by the Saudis, he's compromised by the Russians. He's got a history of being involved with the Russians in terms of money, that he's got a history of being paid for by the Israelis. So you've got a long history there of really, profiteering from a bunch of countries that are opposed to America's national interests. And now here you have this incremental thing that's going on with the war that's making it really hard for America to maintain its position in the world, because we've now, alienated all our countries that we're traditionally allied with and are partnering with countries that are, who is he really representing? The Iranians didn't even want to talk to him. They're like, he's representing Israel. Why should we have the guy representing Israel here to discuss these? So they asked for the name of negotiators.
And if the plans that Epstein drew up are actually what they're planning to do, they're essentially planning to remove the Western banking system from a lot of the world and trying to kind of be that new power that the United States have been for many years. And so it's very, very important that our officials are paying attention and not just playing the games, because that's, for me, is the biggest annoyance with all of our politicians, and is all of the social media posts that they make.
In fairness, I think Congressman Raskin did put out a letter to Jared asking some very pointed questions about his connections to the Saudis and demanding some answers. Now, I don't know if he has got an answer to that, and I don't know if it's realistic to even expect him to get an answer, but at least Raskin is asking the questions,
100.
And the Democrats are at least asking the questions about Kushner's very, very profitable.
I know that much. They've posted about having an investigation opened into Jared Kushner as it relates to all of those things, related to the EA Sports deal, all of that stuff. And it's really validating to see it all line up, to see that everything that I've written is yes, this is they have questions. So,
it certainly could be a part of what you're doing, and everyone's collective involvement here.
So important.
The stories you're writing about Jared and the Saudis are important questions that if people aren't focused on them, others are not going to bring it up in Congress. And I think the New York Times has also done some interesting reporting, but generally speaking, there's been very little reporting.
And how the suppression of Jared Kushner in the news and like how it is not being talked about. It's like a stat itself. Yeah. Because I have been writing about this for, I don't know, over a month now, specifically like Jared and what is going on. And so it's been nice to finally see more about this, because I mean, I'm definitely not the first person to like put this together all the way as far as he's concerned, maybe the way I've done it here in my article, but like people know that he's corrupt. It's yes, exactly. This graphic, like how is the general population going to be aware of these facts if nobody is talking about them?
According to popular information, only 5 of the New York Times articles, and those are the famous 5 that we really helped highlight the story around how MBS was encouraging the Iran war conflict and about Kushner's involvement. And that's only 5 of those articles in the New York Times even mentioned his Saudi conflicts of interest, compared to 48 other articles that mentioned Jared Kushner in general, which didn't mention his conflicts of interest. And that goes down the line. And as you go down the mainstream press there, no one is mentioning Jared Kushner's conflicts of interest with the Saudis as he's negotiating the peace deal around Iran and as he's negotiating other peace deals around the world. This is not just suppression. This is a failure of duty. And this is the mainstream media failing to report on the basic facts of the story. Yes. This is not one of those things you can just ignore in a story. It's one of those things that should be high up.
Literally the core of,
yeah, exactly. So what are you hoping is, or what do you think the next layer of this is going to be? Because we've got Raskin obviously in an investigative mode, and that's good to see that they're engaged that way. He's not going to step away from the ring of power as long as his father-in-law is there. Yeah.
I think that the only way that we get anything done is midterms. We just have to hope that they haven't manipulated everything to a point where we can't do that. But I think the only way is for either Congress to get the president out so we can get a DOJ that will do their job and allow allow Congress to do their job. I mean, Congress can only see and act on the things that they're being given. And I know a lot of things that they should have access to, they don't.
I mean, she was at least a little bit more independent than Blanche is. I don't think Blanche is going to give us any independence at all.
So this is why, in my opinion, this is part of what makes Trump the ultimate puppet, is that he is the definition of a narcissist, and people who are smart and intelligent, they know how to manipulate that. And I think Pam Bondi was very easy to manipulate in that same way. I don't think Todd Blanche is. I think that he is just more of a snake. And so I think that it's a little bit more dangerous. I mean, he's the one, as far as I remember, he's the one that met with Ghislaine Maxwell to basically get her to say, Trump never did anything wrong. I never saw him do anything. Oh, wow. Now she's in a lower security prison. So I don't really see a lot happening. The only thing I can really hope is that some of our allies, some of the other countries that know what's going on will start to do, because it's not just our country. There's others involved. So I know that this has to come out more at some point, but I don't know that it will be in the United States, at least before midterms.
It's such a unpopular thing to do from a number of perspectives. But here is the letter from Raskin. I was able to pull this up here. Let me just find a way to do this so you can see it as clearly as possible. And, what he is saying, this is dated April 16th, 2026. And it's to Jared, and he's saying, in commas, special envoy for peace, because that is a weird title for anybody in the U.S. government. You're now reportedly participating as special envoy for peace in negotiations on behalf of the United States government to address the rolling conflicts in the Middle East. At the same time, you are soliciting billions of dollars from Gulf monarchies for your private business ventures, while already managing billions of dollars of their money in your international investment firm. Your decision to act in these 2 roles, one public for the government and one private for personal profit, creates a glaring and incurable conflict of interest. Your clients, Saudi Arabia and the Royal Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, have unique and significant strategic, economic, and political interests that are certain to diverge sharply from the strategic, economic, and political interests of the American people. when you approach negotiations related to the catastrophic Iran war, the prospect of a prolonged military conflict there, the right of women and religious minorities in the Middle East, or the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, are you representing 100% the interests of the American people? Or is it a 50-50 split that you apportion in your loyalties between your official and corporate clients? Your client, Saudi Arabia, wants to see a continuation and escalation of President Trump's Iran war. But the American people have an interest in minimizing the loss of American lives and treasure in the conflict. To whom do your professional obligations and fiduciary duties belong? And that is a very sharp way of asking the question, because we are seeing now a continuation of that war. It doesn't look like anyone wants to stand down. It looks to me like the Saudis have been in Donald Trump's ear all along saying, keep going. And if all that's the case, there's not going to be an easy outcome for this quagmire that America stepped into.
I feel like that's where it comes back to what I was saying about Trump being a narcissist. When you have people that understand that about him, you just have to say, well, they're making you look dumb. They're making you look stupid. You don't want that. Like it literally nothing else matters to the man. So it doesn't matter what kind of logic is involved in making these decisions. Someone who has a severe narcissistic personality like him, when you know how to press his buttons, he's going to do whatever you need him to do. Because as long as you make him think it's his idea, he's going to do it. And so this is how they manipulate him.
How do you know this about narcissistic personalities?
I have a lot of experience.
Really?
I've learned in my adult life that I am a very neurodivergent person. So a lot of these things I have learned to pick up on in other people throughout my life, but I'm just now putting names to all these things. And so I watch him. I watch Trump post on his Truth Social, which I can't even say the word Truth Social. It's just so funny to me. And listening to like what he's writing, I'm like, it's so obvious to me what he's being fed to get him to react this way. And what better for the Russians or anybody who wants the downfall of, our civilization than to completely continue to deplete us and make us hate each other.
And all you need really is one narcissist in the center of it all, and then surround him with people who are just feeding him really tainted knowledge. I mean, that's essentially what's going on. He's being fed lies. Whoever told him that this was a winnable war in a short amount of time was lying to him. Whoever told him that was a good idea to send these naval vessels into the Straits to do a blockade was lying to him, because anyone who was paying attention before knew that this was a kill box situation, and sending troops in there is just not the right solution. They won,
I remember the other day he was ranting about how we won this war and that we'd completely destroyed their navy and all these things. Yet, how are they closing the Strait of Hormuz if we've destroyed everything? Like, there's just no logic in the things that he says. And as the president of the United States, there is no excuse for that. There's no excuse. It is very much your job to go through all of this and make sure that this is, in fact, what's happening and the best situation for us. And that's obviously not even close to what has ever been done by that man.
I have some questions for you about how you got started in all of this. And before we do that, let's just see if there's any questions here. People can ask us on YouTube, they can watching the messages and elsewhere. If you've got any questions to ask Kait or me, now's a good time to ask us. Let's see what else it says here in these questions. Let's see what else people are asking here on YouTube quickly. Jared, Jared learned the family business from his felon father. I mean, that is true.
Because I didn't get to dive into his father as much, but I believe his father is also some kind of special something or other and has some position. Yeah. And they had actually prevented him from some kind of clearance or something.
The French won't speak to him. Yeah, the French were the ambassadors to France, but they won't speak to him. Because he's got this, criminal past. He was in jail for a long time. And he got into jail, I think, because, I don't know, either he or his brother blackmailed each other with a prostitute or some scandalous story that happened in New Jersey way back when.
I had made a joke about the next cabinet meeting was just going to be a screening of Pulp Fiction.
You've got the labor secretary who's going out to strip clubs and drinking with her team and is having an affair with his secretary or security team. And then
You can't
Kash
make this
Patel is
stuff up.
so drunk that he can't be woken up to go to work.
Clearly.
And this chief of staff called the president of the United States a alcoholics personality.
Yes, I bought that hard copy of that magazine. That
Oh,
was in the
it's a good
Vanity
idea.
Fair.
Yeah. Someone's pointing out to you that Christie was the one who put Charles Kushner in jail, which is interesting. Of course, it's one of the
Yeah, I
reasons
don't think I knew that.
Chris Christie is not in the cabinet, has not been in
Yes.
the cabinet, because there's that kind of resentment between the Kushner team and the Christie family that still lingers today.
So before this, I was a marketing professional. I had been laid off. And so I was in the process of still trying to find a new job. And I had the name Kait Justice really came because my husband would joke with me because I'm very active in like our school district. And then I'll get into it more, but it's called a Superfund site is something that I live in. And that has to do with just living in a toxic landfill essentially, but there's many of them across the country. And so I was just very active in EPA meetings. And so he said, look at you go, Kait Justice, just kind of joking with me. And that's kind of where it came from. And
Was
so
it
I
always spelled
started.
K-A-I-T?
Yeah, my name's Caitlin, but
Oh,
a
okay,
lot of
okay.
people call me Kate, and my
Okay.
grandmother always used to spell it Kait, and so that's how I spell it. And so I started making videos about Superfund sites because I had gone to meetings and all these things and tried to do things through the proper channels, if you will, and sending letters. And I got nowhere. Nobody would respond to me properly. And basically what it is throughout the country, we have thousands of Superfund and brownfield sites. And what they are